The unprecedented pace of disruption and uncertainty makes leadership more relevant today than ever before. It is not position or power, but your leadership skills that help you to think in unique, creative ways. When faced with a crisis, a leader is forced to think and make critical decisions. A leader who empowers a team and gives the employees accountability increases the effectiveness of an organization. John Maxwell says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Warren Bennis says that leadership is the capacity to turn vision into reality. And Bill Gates says, as we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. Today, I have the honor of welcoming to this interview, Michael Bolton. Michael Bolton is a consulting software tester and testing teacher who helps people to solve testing problems that they didn't realize they could solve. Michael has 25 years of experience testing, developing, managing, and writing about software. For the last 18 years, he has led Develop Sense, a Toronto-based testing and development consultancy. Prior to that, he was with Quarterdeck Corporation for 8 years, during which he managed the company's flagship products and directed project and testing teams, both in-house and around the world. In 2006, he became co-author with James Back of Rapid Software Testing. Since then, he has flown over 1 million miles to teach rapid software testing in 35 countries on 6 continents. Welcome to this talk, Michael.
Thank you, Sajid. That's
I'd like to start by asking you, what do you think are 3 traits that a project manager or a leader should have to thrive in a disruptive economy?
Well, when you ask me today, the answer changes a little bit every day, of course. But when you ask me today, one of the first and most important ones, it seems to me, is adaptability. Things have changed at a remarkable rate over the last several months, and we've been presented with a number of challenges. And so whatever ideas that we had to manage our projects and to make choices about the things that we're doing, a lot of the context has been enormously disrupted. So adaptability is really important. Another component, I think you'll agree is important, because there it is sitting over your left shoulder, is empathy. It's important for leaders to realize that in this kind of circumstance, with life in a turmoil, that not everybody deals with it very well. Not everybody deals with it the same way. And so it's important for leaders to be reflective about that, and to recognize that one person may not respond in the same way, and that people have needs and desires that are sometimes hidden, sometimes not even within their own consciousness. Sometimes people don't realize what it is they want or what it is they need. So empathy is a big deal. I think perhaps another thing that would be worth noting, if you're looking for 3, is a recognition of the difference between preparation and planning. You can plan for all sorts of stuff, but I think it was perhaps Eisenhower, I don't remember, and it's not terribly important anyway, who said that the plan never survives first contact with the enemy. And in the case of projects, especially software development projects, the enemy is not the competition necessarily, nor is it the say in this specific example, is it the coronavirus? The enemy is the dynamics of systems. For any planning that you make, it's important for a leader to be a good systems thinker and to recognize that you can be prepared for things, but to plan for them is a different kettle of fish, because whatever comes along, your plans will be forced to change by changing contexts and changing dynamics in the systems that you're working with and working in.
Yeah, in this dynamic world, you have brought out very good points. One is adaptability, the second is empathy, and the third is recognizing the difference between preparation and planning. We now come
systems approach. I just wanted to give you credit. A manager should, or a leader rather, should also be good at summarizing, and you did that very well.
We now come to crisis response. How does a leader respond to a crisis, and what are some of the effective parts of that response?
Well, I think the things that I've already mentioned are key to it. That it is important for a leader to keep his or her own mind and his or her own body together. My great mentor and advisor, Jerry Weinberg, once put it very nicely. He said that it's just like being on the airplanes, which of course most of us aren't doing these days, but you'll notice during the safety lecture that the flight attendants will tell you, make sure that your own mask is adjusted before you try to help others. And so I think it's very important for a leader to adjust him and or herself in the circumstance, and to center himself or herself, so that the leader in that case can deal with helping other people.
Yeah, take care of your own self. I mean, first. In terms of...
You'll be able to do that if you can't, you won't be able to help other people if you are in trouble yourself. Yeah.
Correct. Taking care of a team, the leader and a team. How do you keep your team motivated and connected? And what can you do to support them in times of crisis?
Not just in terms of crisis, at any time.
Anytime.
I get this question about how do we motivate people? And I don't think motivation is a problem. I think people who volunteered for a job, people who are not slaves, people who are free agents, are intrinsically motivated. They're already motivated to do stuff. I think in most cases, the big problem is that there are things that demotivate them. And one of the things that a leader does is to help remove the obstacles or the bureaucracy or the constraints that cause people to lose their motivation. I think that people are intrinsically motivated and energized, especially when they're given freedom and responsibility to do good and meaningful work. But people will learn pretty quickly. We've got a new puppy in the house, and I'm amused at how the puppy is a model for the way people learn and people behave. It's a nice simplification. But in our house, the new puppy is a lovely model of what happens when you extend freedom and you require responsibility. Now, of course, I'm not going to say that people are puppies, but when people have responsibility over the quality of the work that they do, rather than being commanded or driven or obliged to do every little thing in a specific way, then they use their own motivation and their own wiles, and they get a sense of worth out of what they're doing. That they are able to indulge the creative impulse that keeps people energized and motivated. So that's the big thing for me. Give people freedom, give people responsibility, and that will help to create a space where they're empowered to do their best work.
If you look back at your career, what do you think is one of the big challenges that you have faced as a project manager? One of the biggest, maybe.
Oh, project management was hard. Oh my goodness. It was really difficult. And I think one of the hardest things about it, when I look back and think on stuff like that, when I was younger, it seems to me it was easier to stay organized. It was easier to stay focused for me. You would think that would get better as you get older. But I'm living now in a world that I was not prepared for. I'm living in a world that I didn't grow up in. And that's a world where there is information coming at me all the time. There's LinkedIn, and there's Slack, and then there's this a practice that people have undertaken lately. I've just recently learned the word doom scrolling, of course, because of the situation with the virus. People are now, scrolling through their news feeds and looking for hope, or looking for bad news, or looking for data, or looking for something that can help them wrap their heads around this. And then there's email, and then there's Twitter, and then there's Facebook, and there's all the other things that if we allow them to, will disrupt us. Now, I look at my daughter and her friends, and I see that they're used to this kind of world to a great degree, a lot more than I was, than I am, I mean. One of the things I'd like to get back at some point is an ability to turn it off. But it's very enticing, to be so connected to people. That feeling of being able to reach out to people, and people being able to reach out to me, and to respond to that immediately. So I think that the capacity to stay focused is something I once had, and that I've kind of lost a bit. It's a challenge. So again, that's a question of or an issue of making sure your own mask is adjusted before you try to help other people.
You talked about information overload, and my next question is something like that, because now we are living the new norm wherein everything is virtual. You are talking on Zoom like we are doing now. We have Skype, we have Google Meetings, we have WhatsApp, Slack, and Telegram, and whatnot. So how do you actually lead effectively in a virtual workplace?
It's got to be really, really tough, because so much of the human dimension of a regular everyday interaction is gone just for the moment. So I'm going to offer a tip. This is just a little thing that I've noticed that seems to help somehow, and that is, let me give you a video contrast. Many people, it seems to me, encounter virtual meetings like this, or like this, looking down at their screen. Their screen is set up. Now, I spent a bit of money, not very much, on really high quality microphone. And I can't show it to you because, of course, it's it's how you're seeing me right now, but on a reasonably high quality camera. And I'm sitting away from the camera and the screen. And so although I'm looking at you on a screen, the camera is very close to that screen. And being a bit of a distance away, it looks a little bit more like I'm looking at you. Now that is a very artificial kind of a compensation for something which is natural, which is when we're in a room with people, we see the whole person. We see their body language. We see the dynamics that are going on in the rest of the room. We see them connecting and communicating with other people. If there's a distraction, we understand the source of that distraction. So my little tip, and it might not seem consequential, but it seems to have helped in my interactions with people, is to sit back from the camera and let other people see more of yourself, more of your body. Now, of course, that is like it's like the allegory of the cave, right? We're only seeing shadows of our real selves in these digital forums, right? We're only seeing an image of each other rather than each other. So I don't think this is, forever. I don't think this is the new normal. I think this is the new abnormal. And we will realize the degree to which this very heavily mediated form of communication is less than desirable. I cannot imagine how parents, especially single parents, mostly mothers, so it seems, can cope with the degree of distraction that they suddenly have in their office. Now, by the same token, many years ago, I visited Israel on a work assignment. And there was a lovely holiday there called Sukkot. And on the day that the holiday starts, or the series it goes over several days, I imagine. But on that day, people bring their kids and their pets into work, which seemed to me a wonderful humanizing kind of thing, a nice little tradition. And I think it's actually really good to have kids around all the time, but having to juggle the focus on the kids and the focus on the work is really, really difficult. So maybe part of the new normal is to be more tolerant and aware of things that are going on around us and that might distract us and interrupt us from the focus of our work on the one hand and the focus of things like parenting and other forms of social interaction on the other. So those are a few things that I think we need to be very sensitive to in the days ahead, and hope that the experts and the scientists and the technologists can help us return to something like the old normal.
So many companies worldwide were taken by surprise at the beginning of the year when the COVID pandemic struck. So how do we actually preempt such a risk and factor it in a risk management plan?
Well, I think it goes back to the adaptability thing. And that is, I would turn down the knob on planning and turn up the knob on preparation. I remember, again, another thing that I'd learned from Jerry Weinberg. When he was at IBM, he noticed that certain groups explain their success or their failure in interestingly different ways. One group that had a failing project outlined the fact that, outlined the circumstances behind that project failure. And that was, you know, they included things like, well, perhaps there's a flood in the server room and they lost a bunch of work. And then, you know, a key member of the team was off for several months, and that was unexpected. Those kinds of things. Whereas the other team reported that, yes, the project had been a success. And Jerry asked them, so did you encounter any problems along the way? And they said, oh, yes, you know, we lost a bunch of data at one point, and we had a key member of the team away for quite a while. The details I do not remember clearly, but you can see the pattern here. The pattern was that the second team anticipated the possibility of problems and outlined, well, if this were to happen, how might we recover from it? But they wouldn't, my understanding is they didn't do it in too much detail. They outlined some possible risks for the project and addressed them. So not only do we have backups of the software we're building, but we've tested the restore. Right? That happened on a project that I was a junior member of one time. The project was delayed by several days because they had data loss, and then turns out that they had been fooling themselves about the quality of their backups. So it took quite a while to regain their ground. Socially, as soon as you've got a single person who's responsible for a particular thing and who is not sharing that work with other people, then you're without a backup if one of those people gets incapacitated or is unavailable and those sorts of things. So not knowing what the particular problem is going to be, but every now and again discussing the risk of just everyday life and of black swans, improbable circumstances that have a really big impact. You know, 1 hour of doing that over a 9-month project, it seems to me, can set us up for rapid recovery when something knocks us off our balance. In fact, if you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see that agility does not mean speed. Agility means nimbleness and the capacity to recover your balance quickly when something knocks you off it. So I would suggest that every now and again have a session where you imagine some scenarios, and even if the specific scenarios don't play out, the reflection on what you might do in order to respond to them could be quite beneficial. But the other thing is to do those things. Once you've thought, oh, here's something we could do to help prevent disaster, you actually have to get it done. And so when somebody recognizes a potential risk or reads about one by reviewing books and websites and so on. There's a wonderful site called the Risks Digest, and they're terrific books on failures, project failures, and engineering failures. I'm thinking in terms of people like Charles Perrow and Henry Petrosky. Learning from the mistakes of other people can be a great way to get a set of ideas on, all right, how will we prepare for a problem?
I like the definition of agility, of the nimbleness, because as humans, I think we are affected by crisis and we have to accept that first. But the important point is about recovering fast, being nimble enough to recover our emotions and balance in time.
Absolutely. The subtitle of the arguably the first book on agile software development, which was Extreme Programming Explained, the subtitle of that book was Embrace Change. So one thing we know for sure is going to happen is that things are going to change. And this pandemic has certainly helped us to recognize, in some ways, of course, the ways in which these things are very, very painful and disruptive. I think there's some good news as well. People are remarkably adaptable. I went out shopping yesterday just for some groceries. And at least in Canada, at least in Toronto, where I live, the sense that I got at looking around the streetscape and people's responses to be, to the circumstance, the behavioral change doesn't have to be that hard if you decide you're not going to make a big deal about it. People were wearing masks, and the people around my neighborhood, at least, their attitude seemed to be mostly, okay, we're doing this. This is our reality, and we're going to deal with it. And I think that's another really, really important lesson that I've tried to incorporate myself, and I've tried to help other people with. Once again, a great wisdom from Jerry Weinberg. The problem is not the problem. Your reaction to the problem may be the problem, right? So it's how you react to this circumstance. The circumstance is what it is. It's going to be that way. How we choose to react to it is key to success, it seems to me, or failure.
What do you see as a future for project managers?
Oh, I don't see futures. I can talk about what I've seen, and maybe we can extrapolate that farther. I think the role of lots of people has been foolishly dismissed over the years. Look, people are working in circumstances where there's an enormous amount of information flying around, enormous amount of work to do. And there's been quite a bit of talk lately about the idea, oh no, we should get rid of project managers. We should just have a scrum master, or, in my domain, we should get rid of task managers because, we can organize that all ourselves. Well, I don't think that's true. Imagine an orchestra without a conductor. A string quartet, maybe you can organize that without a conductor, but an orchestra, it's really hard to imagine. And there's a wonderful documentary that came out not too long ago, and I stumbled on it, didn't hear about it, but I want to bring it up to you because I think the lesson is so valuable. The documentary was about General Magic, which was a company that was organized at and around Apple starting in 1989 or so. And in that, the idea behind that company was to create these little handheld computing and communication devices that would allow people to get access to all kinds of information, to talk to each other, to send messages quickly to each other, and all in a nice, beautiful, elegantly designed package. Now, of course, I know that idea sounds completely crazy to you, and of course it went nowhere. The funny thing is, in the 1990s, when people were working on it, it ended up going nowhere. At the time, it was so far ahead of its time. And there were so many aspects of this thing to coordinate that it wasn't successful. And organizations, companies had to take a few runs at it in order to for it to work. But in the documentary, there's a fellow who's speaking, and he says there are moments when somebody has to start doing something, and he's speaking in the background as you're there live watching him on camera, and he's saying there are moments when somebody has to start doing something, and what we've decided is that for each of those important moments, we want to make sure that there's real responsibility for someone to say, you know, I'm at this important moment, you know, start doing your work. Well, the response to that from one of the people, and I haven't captured his name, I have to do better research and go back and find out who this fellow is, but he's talking about the three leaders of the company, Mark and Poratz and Bill Atkinson and Andy Hirschfeld. So he's saying Mark and Andy and Bill together decided that, well, this is the person to manage the engineering team, and that's what they wanted me to do. And then there was this one day where I came to talk to all of them at once, and they say, oh no, we don't need a manager. We don't want you because we don't need a manager. Our leaders are Andy and Bill. That's what makes this place great, is that we don't have managers. And then another fellow whose name I did capture says today, in the modern day, he says, he's sort of quoting what they were saying back then. He says, well, we can be managers without a manager, and we know what's best. Managers are just going to get in the way. We don't need program managers. We don't need any of that stuff. We're just going to make it happen. And of course they didn't. And then Mark Poratz, who is the visionary behind the whole thing, again in the modern day, recounts that era. And he says, there's a fearlessness and a sense of correctness. No questioning of, could I be wrong? None. Because that's what you need to break out of Earth's gravity. You need an enormous amount of momentum, and that momentum comes from suppressing introspection about the possibility of failure. Now, this is where I think project managers and testers and test managers intersect in very important ways. Because in a project, it is important for the people building the project to envision success. And that's because you can't get something done without believing that it can be done and without taking a running shot at it. At the same time, though, I think that ambition needs to be tempered to some degree to prevent people from running off in all directions, from conflicting with each other, from trying to do stuff without the resources that they need. And this is where I believe that the testers are the project manager's best friends, because it is a tester's job, it's a tester's role to anticipate failure. And it's a tester's role to identify the actual status of things in the project in a way that is socially awkward, because as everybody else is saying, oh, what a wonderful project we got and how well things are going, it's the tester's job to observe that it's not necessarily exactly what we wanted, and to discover the ways that it's not like that. And that's socially difficult, but it's super important, I believe, because if you are not aware of problems in the project, then those problems will persist and they'll get worse. There's room for them to grow. And so, testers are the canaries in the coal mine, and they're the smoke alarms of the project, and they deliver the unhappy news that maybe things aren't quite what we want them to be. But with that knowledge, managers and builders alike can make decisions about whether those problems are problems that need to be fixed or problems that we can live with. So that's my appeal to project managers. And that also intersects with something I was saying earlier, which is, in order for testers to do excellent testing work, they need that freedom and responsibility. They need the obstacles to be removed. They need the bureaucracy to be taken away so that they can do their best work in investigating the product. I realize that some organizations work under certain kinds of requirements for formality, regulated environments and so on. But I would appeal to, I've written a good deal about this on my blog in the last little while. I would appeal to people who are working in regulated environments to remember that the regulators themselves do not want bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. They want good work done. They want problems to be identified and addressed. And the stock ways that people have of managing testing, especially, the traditional ways of doing that, the focus on test cases and documentation and process models and so on. It's my observation that they don't help very much, but the regulators will permit you to do all kinds of things if you can demonstrate to them that you are providing the results that they need to see, which is evidence of excellent testing work, evidence of excellent project work too. If you can do that in a way that's less burdensome than the ways they have in mind, that is entirely permissible. You can look up the principles of the least burdensome approach for those who are working in a FDA regulated kind of context, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. The European community has similar kinds of things. So to bring all that together, we need people who can not only build stuff and envision success, we need people who can anticipate and detect failure, and putting those things together makes for a much more powerful project environment.
Which brings me to my final question. Do you have any words of advice for youngsters or millennials who would like to take up a career in project management or leadership roles?
Yeah, my principal advice would be learn about people, learn about how people work, and learn especially, because I don't think enough attention is paid to it, learn how groups of people work. That means learning about general systems. It means learning about sociology. It means learning about psychology. And it means learning about history. So it is very enticing and very dazzling to think about technology and how technologies can help us. But we've got to make sure that we're thinking in those terms, that technology can help us, but technology can also hurt us in the sense that technology amplifies, extends, enhances, intensifies, enables, accelerates whatever we are. And it accelerates whatever people do, whether that is wise or foolish. The technology doesn't care. Technology is agnostic about whether we're good or evil. The technology is agnostic about amplifying our competence or amplifying our incompetence. So my suggestion would be, sure, study technology, but study the way people interact, the way people think about technology. I would recommend studying the humanities, studying social sciences, and understand how people work. And then you'll be in a much better position to apply technology and to realize how technology can hurt you as well as help you.
It has been a pleasure talking to you, Michael. And I must thank you for sharing your wisdom and insights on all those questions. You have, it has been an eye-opener for me, and I'm sure those who listen to this will benefit from it a great deal. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm happy to continue the conversation. I am Michael at developsense.com. I'm Michael Bolton on Twitter. I'm Michael.A.Bolton on Skype. Anybody who's good at Googling will be able to find me with great ease, except you probably want to include the word testing, or you'll get that Singer guy. But I would be delighted to continue the conversation with anybody who is seeing this conversation through your various means of broadcast.